Hello and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we begin our reading of Between Planets by Robert Heinlein. Chapter 1, New Mexico. Easy, boy, easy! Don Harvey reined in the fat little cow pony. Ordinarily, Lazy lived up to his name. Today he seemed to want to go places. Don hardly blamed him. It was such a day as comes only to New Mexico, with sky scrubbed clean by a passing shower, the ground already dry but with a piece of rainbow still hanging in the distance. The sky was too blue, the buttes too rosy, and the far reaches too sharp to be quite convincing. Incredible peace hung over the land, and with a breathless expectancy of something wonderful about to happen. "You've got all day," he cautioned Lazy, "so don't get yourself in a lather. That's a stiff climb ahead." Don was riding alone because he had decked out Lazy in a magnificent Mexican saddle his parents had ordered sent to him for his birthday. It was a beautiful thing, as gaudy with silver as an Indian buck, but it was as out of place at the ranch school he attended as formal clothes at a branding, a point which his parents had not realized. Don was proud of it, but the other boys rode plain stock saddles. They kidded him unmercifully and had turned Donald James Harvey into Don Jamie when he first appeared with it. Lazy suddenly shied. Don glanced around, spotted the cause, whipped out his gun, and fired. He then dismounted, throwing the reins forward so that Lazy would stand, and examined his work. In the shadow of a rock, a fair-sized snake, 7 rattles on its tail, was still twitching. Its head lay by it, burned off. Don decided not to save the rattles. Had he pinpointed the head, he would have taken it in to show his marksmanship. As it was, he had been forced to slice sideways with the beam before he got it. If he brought a snake killed in such a clumsy manner, someone would be sure to ask him why he hadn't used a garden hoe. He let it lie and remounted while talking to Lazy. "Just a no-good old sidewinder," he said reassuringly. "More scared of you than you were of it." He clucked and they started off. A few hundred yards further on, Lazy shied again, not from a snake this time, but from an unexpected noise. Don pulled him in and spoke severely. "You bird-brained butterball, when are you going to learn not to jump when the phone rings?" Lazy twitched his shoulder muscles and snorted. Don reached for the pommel, removed the phone, and answered, "Don Harvey speaking." "Mr. Reeves, Don." "Mr. Reeves, Don," came the voice of his headmaster. "Where are you?" "Headed up Peddler's Grave Mesa, sir." "Get home as quickly as you can." What's up, sir?" "Radiogram from your parents. I'll send the copter out for you if the cook is back, with someone to bring your horse in." Don hesitated. He didn't want just anybody to ride Lazy, like as not getting him overheated and failing to cool him off. On the other hand, a radio from his folks could not help but be important. His parents were on Mars, and his mother wrote regularly every ship, but radiograms, other than Christmas and birthday greetings, were almost unheard of. "I'll hurry, sir." "Right." Mr. Reeves switched off. Don turned Lazy and headed back down the trail. Lazy seemed disappointed and looked back accusingly. As it turned out, they were only a half-mile from the school when the ranch copter spotted them. Don waved it off and took Lazy on in himself. Despite his curiosity, he delayed to wipe down the pony and water it before he went in. Mr. Reeves was waiting in his office and motioned for him to come in. He handed Don the message. It read, "Dear son, passage reserved for you Valkyrie Circumterra, 12 April, love, Mother and Dad." Don blinked at it, having trouble taking in the simple facts. "But that's right away." "Yes, you weren't expecting it?" Don thought it over. He had halfway expected to go home, if one could call it going home when he had never set foot on Mars, at the end of the school year. If they had arranged his passage for the Vanderdecken 3 months from now, not exactly. I can't figure out why they would send for me before the end of term." Mr. Reeves fitted his fingertips carefully together. "I'd say that it was obvious." Don looked startled. "You mean? Mr. Reeves, you don't really think there is going to be trouble, do you?" The headmaster answered gravely, "Don, I'm not a prophet, but it is my guess that your parents are sufficiently worried that they want you out of a potential war zone as quickly as possible." He was still having trouble readjusting. Wars were something you studied, not something that actually happened. Of course, his class in contemporary history had kept track of the current crisis in colonial affairs, but even so, it had seemed something far away, even for one as widely traveled as himself, a matter for diplomats and politicians, not something real. "Look, Mr. Reeves, they may be jumpy, but I'm not. I'd like to send a radio telling them that I'll be along on the next ship as soon as school is out." Mr. Reeves shook his head. "No, I can't let you go against your parents' explicit instructions. In the second place, The headmaster seemed to be having difficulty in choosing his words. "That is to say, Donald, in the event of war, you might find your position here, shall we call it, uncomfortable." A bleak wind seemed to have found its way into the office. Don felt lonely and older than he should feel. "Why?" he asked gruffly. Mr. Reeves studied his fingernails. "Are you quite sure where your loyalties lie?" he said slowly. Don forced himself to think about it. His father had been born on Earth. His mother was a second-generation Venus colonial. But neither planet was truly their home. They had met and married on Luna and had pursued their researches in planetology in many sectors of the solar system, Don himself having been born out in space, and his birth certificate, issued by the Federation, had left the question of his nationality open. He could claim dual citizenship by parental derivation. He did not think of himself as a Venus colonial. It had been so long since his family had last visited Venus that the place had grown unreal in his mind. On the other hand, he had been 11 years old before he had ever rested his eyes on the lovely hills of Earth. "I'm a citizen of the system," he said harshly. Said his headmaster. "That's a fine phrase, and perhaps someday it will mean something. In the meantime, speaking as a friend, I agree with your parents. Mars is likely to be neutral territory. You'll be safe there. Again, speaking as your friend, things may get a little rough here for anyone whose loyalty is not perfectly clear." "Nobody has any business questioning my loyalty. Under the law, I count as native-born." The man still did not answer. Don burst out, "The whole thing is silly. If the Federation wasn't trying to bleed Venus white, there wouldn't be any war talk." Reeves stood up. "That will be all, Don. I'm not going to argue politics with you." "It's true. Read Chamberlain's theory of colonial expansion." Reeves seemed startled. "Where did you lay hands on that book? Not in the school library." Don did not answer. His father had sent it to him, but had cautioned him not to let it be seen. It was one of the suppressed books, on Earth at least. Reeves went on, "Don, have you been dealing with a bootlegger?" Don remained silent. "Answer me." Presently, Reeves took a deep breath and said, "Never mind. Go up to your room and pack. The copter will take you to Albuquerque in 1 hour." "Yes, sir." He started to leave when the headmaster called him back. "Just a moment. In the heat of our discussion, I almost forgot there was a second message for you." "Oh?" Don accepted the slip. It said, "Dear son, be sure to say goodbye to Uncle Dudley before you leave. Mother." The second message surprised him in some ways even more than the first. He had trouble realizing that his mother must mean Dr. Dudley Jefferson, a friend of his parents, but no relation, and a person of no importance in his own life. But Reeves seemed not to see anything odd in the message, so he stuck it in his Levi's and left the room. Long as he had been earthbound, he approached packing with a true spaceman's spirit. He knew that his passage would entitle him to only 50 pounds of free lift. He started discarding right and left. Shortly he had two piles, a very small one on his own bed, indispensable clothing, a few capsules of microfilm, his slide rule, a stylus, and a vritha, a flute-like Martian instrument which he had not played in a long time, as his schoolmates objected. On his roommate's bed was a much larger pile of discards. He picked up the vritha, tried a couple of runs, and put it on the larger pile. Taking a Martian product to Mars was coal to Newcastle. His roommate, Jack Moreau, came in as he did so. "What in time goes on? House cleaning?" "Leaving." Jack dug a finger into his ear. "I must be getting deaf. I could have sworn you said you were leaving." "I am." Don stopped and explained, showing Jack the message from his parents. Jack looked distressed. "I don't like this. Of course I knew this was our last year, but I didn't figure on you jumping the gun. I probably won't sleep without your snores to soothe me. What's the rush?" "I don't know. I really don't. The head says that my folks have war jitters and want to drag their little darling to safety. But that's silly, don't you think? I mean, people are too civilized to go to war today." Jack did not answer. Don waited, then said sharply, "You agree, don't you? There won't be any war." Jack answered slowly, "Could be, or maybe not." "Oh, come off it." His roommate answered, "Want me to help you pack?" "There isn't anything to pack." "How about all that stuff? That's yours if you want it. Pick it over, then call in the others and let them take what they like." "Huh? Gee, Don, I don't want your stuff. I'll pack it and ship it after you. Ever ship anything between planets? It's not worth it." "Then sell it. Tell you what, we'll hold an auction right after supper." Don shook his head. "No time. I'm leaving at 1 o'clock. "What? You're really blitzing me, kid. I don't like this." "Can't be helped." He turned back to his sorting. Several of his friends drifted in to say goodbye. Don himself had not spread the news, and he did not suppose that the headmaster would have talked, yet somehow the grapevine had spread the word. He invited them to help themselves to the plunder, subject to Jack's prior claim. Presently, he noticed that none of them asked why he was leaving. It bothered him more than if they had talked about it. He wanted to tell someone, anyone, that it was ridiculous to doubt his loyalty, and anyhow there wasn't going to be a war. Roop Salter, a boy from another wing, stuck his head in, looked over the preparations. "Running out, eh? I heard you were and thought I'd check up." "I'm leaving, if that's what you mean." "That's what I said. See here, Don Jamie, how about that circus saddle of yours? I'll take it off your hands if the price is right." "It's not for sale." "Huh? No horses where you're going. Make me a price." "It belongs to Jack here." "And it's still not for sale," Moreau answered promptly. "Like that, eh? Suit yourself," Salter went on blandly. "Another thing, you willed that nag of yours yet?" The boys' mounts, with few exceptions, were owned by the school, but it was a cherished and long-standing privilege of a boy graduating to will his temporary ownership to a boy of his choice. Don looked up sharply. Until that moment he had not thought about Lazy. He realized with sudden grief that he could not take the little fat clown with him, nor had he made any arrangements for his welfare. "The matter is settled," he answered, adding to himself, "as far as you're concerned." "Who gets him? I could make it worth your while. He's not much of a horse, but I want to get rid of the goat I've had to put up with." "It's settled." "Be sensible. I can see the head and get him anyhow. Willing a horse is a graduating privilege, and you're ducking out ahead of time. Get out." Salter grinned. "Touchy, aren't you? Just like all fog-eaters, too touchy to know what's good for you. Well, you're going to be taught a lesson someday soon." Don, already on edge, was too angry to trust himself to speak. Fog-eater, used to describe a man from cloud-wrapped Venus, was merely ragging, no worse than limey or yank, unless the tone of voice and context made it, as now, a deliberate insult. The others looked at him, half expecting action. Jack got up hastily from the bed and went toward Salter. "Get going, Salty. We're too busy to monkey around with you." Salter looked at Don, then back at Jack, shrugged, and said, "I'm too busy to hang around here, but not too busy if you have anything in mind." The noon bell pealed from the mess hall. It broke the tension. Several boys started for the door. Salter moved out with them. Don hung back. Jack said, "Come on, beans." Jack, "Yeah? How about you taking over, Lazy?" "Gee, Don, I'd like to accommodate you, but what would I do with Lady Maud?" I guess so. What'll I do?" "Let me see." Jack's face brightened. "You know that kid Squinty Morris, the new kid from Manitoba? He hasn't got a permanent yet. He's been taking his rotation with the goats. He'd treat Lazy right. I know. I let him try Maudie once. He's got gentle hands." Don looked relieved. "Will you fix it for me? And see Mr. Reeves?" "Huh? You can see him at lunch. Come on." "I'm not going to lunch. I'm not hungry, and I don't much want to talk to the head about it." "Why not?" "Well, I don't know. When he called me in this morning, he didn't seem exactly friendly." "What did he say?" "It wasn't his words, it was his manner. Maybe I am touchy, but I sort of thought he was glad to see me go." Don expected Jack to object, convince him that he was wrong. Instead, he was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Don't take it too hard, Don. The head is probably edgy, too. You know he's got his orders." "Huh? What orders?" "You knew he was a reserve officer, didn't you? He put in for orders and got him effective end of the term. Mrs. Reeves is taking over the school for the duration." Don, already overstrained, felt his head whirling. For the duration? How could anyone say that when there wasn't any such thing? "It's a fact," Jack went on. "I got it straight from Cookie." He paused, then went on, "See here, old son, we're pals, aren't we?" "Huh? Sure, sure." "Then give it to me straight up. Are you actually going to Mars, or are you heading for Venus to sign up?" "Whatever gave you that notion?" "Skip it, then. Believe me, it wouldn't make any difference between us. My old man says when it's time to be counted, the important thing is to be man enough to stand up." He looked at Don's face, then went on, "What you do about it is up to you. You know I've got a birthday coming up next month?" Yes, so you have." "Come then, I'm going to sign up for pilot training. That's why I wanted to know what you plan to do." "Oh." "But it doesn't make any difference, not between us. Anyhow, you're going to Mars." Yes, that's right." "Good." Jack glanced at his watch. "I've got to run, or they'll throw my chow to the pigs. Sure you're not coming?" "Sure." "See you." He dashed out. Don stood for a moment, rearranging his ideas. Old Jack must be taking this seriously, giving up Yale for pilot training. But he was wrong. He had to be wrong. Presently he went out to the corral. Lazy answered his call, then started searching his pockets for sugar. "Sorry, old fellow," he said sadly, "not even a carrot. I forgot." He stood with his face to the horse's cheek and scratched the beast's ears. He talked to it in low tones, explaining as carefully as if Lazy could understand all the difficult words. "So that's how it is," he concluded. "I've got to go away, and they won't let me take you with me." He thought back to the day their association had begun. Lazy had been hardly more than a colt, but Don had been frightened of him. He seemed huge, dangerous, probably carnivorous. He had never seen a horse before coming to Earth. Lazy was the first he'd ever seen close up. Lazy nickered softly, knowing that something was wrong, and tried to nuzzle him. Don raised his head. Goodbye, boy. Take care of yourself. He turned abruptly and ran toward the dormitories. Chapter 2. Mene, mene, tekel uparsin. Daniel 5:25. The school copter dumped him down at the Albuquerque field. He had to hurry to catch his rocket as traffic control had required them to swing wide around Sandia Weapons Center. When he weighed in, he ran into another new security wrinkle. Got a camera in that stuff, son? The weightmaster had inquired as he passed over his bags. No, why? Because we'll fog your film when we fluoroscope, that's why. Apparently, X-ray failed to show any bombs hidden in his underwear. His bags were handed back and he went aboard. The wing rocket Santa Fe Trail shuttling between the Southwest and New Chicago. Inside, he fastened his safety belts, snuggled down into the cushions, and waited. At first, the noise of the blast-off bothered him more than the pressure, but the noise Dopplered away as they passed the speed of sound, while the acceleration grew worse. He blacked out. He came to as the ship went into free flight, arching in a high parabola over the plains. At once he felt great relief, no longer having unbearable weight racking his rib cage, straining his heart, turning his muscles to water. But before he could enjoy the blessed relief, he was aware of a new sensation. His stomach was trying to crawl up his gullet. At first he was alarmed, being unable to account for the unexpected and unbearably unpleasant sensation. Then he had a sudden wild suspicion. Could he? Oh no, it couldn't be. Not space sickness, not him. Why, he'd been born in free fall. Space nausea was for earth crawlers, groundhogs. But the suspicion grew to certainty. Years of easy living on a planet had worn out his immunity. With secret embarrassment, he conceded that he certainly was acting like a groundhog. It had not occurred to him to ask for an anti-nausea shot before blastoff, though he had walked past the counter plainly marked with a red cross. Shortly, his secret embarrassment became public. He had barely time to get at the plastic container provided for the purpose. Thereafter, he felt better, although weak, and listened half-heartedly to the canned description coming out of the loudspeaker of the country over which they were falling. Presently, near Kansas City, the sky turned from black back to purple again, their airfoils took hold, and the passengers again felt weight as the rocket continued glider fashion on a long, screaming approach to New Chicago. Don folded his couch into a chair and sat up. And we will follow Don to New Chicago next time.